Welcome to the second part of video. This is a direct continuation of the first part. But it is rather a state or condition of being, having nothing to do with space limitations. The astral plane manifests its phenomena by means of a higher rate of vibrations than those concerned in the phenomena of the earth plane. Different planes of being may occupy the same space at the same time, without interfering one with the other. Reaching the vibrations of the astral plane, the newly disembodied soul falls into a deep sleep or state of coma, resembling the condition of the unborn child for several months before its birth. This condition is necessary in order to prepare the soul for its life on the new plane. The soul which has left the earth scene with calmness and peaceful mental attitude soon drops into a dreamless slumber. But those whose minds have been filled with strong desires connected with earth life often experience what are called astral dreams, in which they revisit the scenes of earth life, and if possible, may indulge in more or less distorted and dreamy communications through mediums and others. The strong desires and grief on the part of those left behind on the earth scenes also sometimes act to set up a rapport condition, and thus disturb the sleeping soul and interfere with its needed preparatory rest. In this slumber state, the disembodied soul is fully protected from the influence or presence of other beings, and is as secure as is the child in its mother's womb. Some souls require a long period of soul sleep on the astral plane before awakening into new activities, while others require only a comparatively short time. The general rule is that the higher the spiritual development of the soul, the longer is its period of soul sleep. The period of soul sleep bears a close relation to the period of the sojourn of the soul on the astral plane. The less developed souls rush speedily to rebirth, while the more developed ones spend a much longer time on the astral plane between births. In the soul sleep, a strange process occurs, namely, the preparation for the sloughing off of the lower sheaths of the soul, leaving it free to enter the life on the astral plane, clad only in the garments of its highest stage of spiritual attainment reached by it. Each soul awakens on the astral plane prepared to dwell on the plane of its highest and best, leaving the rest behind it. It awakens on the plane in which the highest and best in itself is given a chance to develop and expand and to make progress. But the soul may, and does, make great progress in these between-birth sojourns on the astral plane. On the astral plane, there are countless subplanes and divisions thereof, all of which are more or less independent of each other. The distinctions between the planes are altogether the result of differences on the rate of vibrations, and do not represent distances in space. Each subplane or division thereof is inhabited by souls exactly fitted to dwell upon it, by reason of their respective degree of spiritual unfoldment. The great law of attraction operates in producing this result, and each soul feels perfectly at home on the plane in which it finds itself. The law works with unerring accuracy and makes no mistakes. By certain fixed natural laws, each soul is restricted to the realms of its own subplane or division of the astral plane, except that it may, if it desires, visit the planes beneath its own. But it cannot visit those higher than its own. The law of vibrations acts as the astral policeman in these matters. Disembodied souls may thus communicate with, and have converse and association with each other, but only by the higher soul visiting the lower and never the reverse. The scenery and environment of the various subplanes of the astral plane correspond with the ideas and beliefs of the souls occupying them. The Indian may find his happy hunting ground much more truly than some people would have us think. The thoughts and ideals of the soul are reflected upon the receptive substance of the astral plane, and each soul, in a certain sense, is the creator of its own environment and world. By its thought forms, it builds itself a congenial world. The soul makes progress during its sojourn on the astral plane and prepares itself for a better and happier environment upon rebirth. During that sojourn, it assimilates and digests the experiences of its last earth life and learns the true lessons of such experiences, and these are reflected in the new character which it is forming. Past mistakes are seen, and the true meaning of many puzzling experiences are perceived. The soul thus takes stock of itself and is better prepared to meet the conditions of its next earth life. On the astral plane, the soul also receives the aid and assistance of some of the great spiritual teachers of the race, whose chosen work is to administer to the wants of the pained and suffering souls who are striving to find the way out of their troubles and mistakes. Not only do these teachers administer to the strictly spiritual wants of the souls seeking their help, but in many cases, the soul is given the advantage of great assistance in chosen occupations, such as art, science, music, invention, etc. From advanced congenial souls ready and willing to help strugglers on the path. Many an artist, musician, writer, or inventor has come into rebirth greatly benefited and improved by reason of contact with such helpers of the astral plane. Finally, after the longer or short period of sojourn of the soul upon the astral plane, the duration of which depends upon the degree of spiritual development of the soul, there comes to it the first dawn of a new state or condition known to occultists as the second soul, sleep, or slumber, in which the soul is prepared for its new birth on earth, which is coming to it. A writer has well described this state as follows. The second soul sleep is preceded by a transition state of gradually declining activity and consciousness, and a corresponding desire for rest on the part of the soul. The natural processes of the astral plane nearing their close, the soul begins to experience a feeling of lassitude and weariness and instinctively longs for rest and repose. It finds that it has lived out the greater part of its desires, ambitions, and ideals, and in many cases has also outlived them. There comes to it a wistful feeling of having fulfilled the purpose of its destiny and a premonition of the coming of some newer phase of existence. The soul does not feel pain at the approach of the second soul sleep, but on the contrary, experiences satisfaction and happiness at the coming of something which promises rest and recuperation. Like the weary traveler who has climbed the mountain paths and has delighted in the experiences of the journey, the soul feels that it has well earned a restful repose, and like that traveler, it looks forward to the same with longing and desire. The same writer says, "The soul may have passed but a few years, or perhaps 100 or 1,000 years of earth time on the astral plane, according to its degree of development and unfoldment. But, be it stay short or long, the feeling of weariness reaches it at last, and like many aged persons in earth life, it feels that, 'My work is over. Let me pass on.' So sooner or later, the soul feels a desire to gain new experience and to manifest in a new life some of the advancement which has come to it by reason of its unfoldment on the astral plane. And from these reasons, and also from the attraction of the desires which have been smoldering there, not lived out or cast off, or possibly influenced by the fact that some loved soul on a lower plane is ready to reincarnate and wishing to be with that soul, which is also a form of desire, the soul falls into a current sweeping toward rebirth and the selection of proper parents and advantageous environment, in consequence whereof it again falls into a state of soul slumber gradually. And so, when its time comes, it dies on the astral plane as it did before on the material plane and passes forward toward rebirth on earth. There is another fact concerned with the awakening of the soul at rebirth, however, which is seldom mentioned by writers upon the subject, and which is consequently not known to many persons familiar with the other facts concerning rebirth. This fact is as follows. Strictly speaking, the soul continues in a condition of partial slumber, even after it has been reborn in earth life. It does not fully awaken at once in the body of the newborn child, in which it has been reincarnated, but, on the contrary, it awakens only gradually during the early childhood and youth of the child. A writer, speaking of the above important fact concerning rebirth, says, "A soul does not fully awaken from its second soul slumber immediately upon rebirth, but it exists in a dreamlike state during the days of infancy. Its gradual awakening is evidenced by the growing intelligence of the babe, the brain of the child keeping pace with the demands made upon it. In some cases, however, the awakening is premature and we see cases of prodigies, child geniuses, etc., but such cases are more or less abnormal and unhealthy. Occasionally, the dreaming soul in the child half awakes and startles its elders by some profound observation or mature remark or conduct. The rare instances of precocious children and infant geniuses are illustrations of cases in which the awakening has been more than ordinarily rapid. On the other hand, cases are known where the soul does not awaken as rapidly as the average, and the result is that the person does not show signs of full intellectual activity until nearly middle-aged. Cases are known where men seem to wake up when they are 40 years of age or even older, and then take on freshened activity and energy, surprising those who had known them before. Here we ask the student to carefully consider another point concerning the need of and consequences of the second soul slumber. Just as in the first soul slumber, the soul underwent a period of spiritual digestion and assimilation of the experiences of its earth life, so in the second soul slumber, it undergoes a period of digestion and assimilation of its experiences on the astral plane. In both of these periods of spiritual digestion and assimilation, the soul converts the substance of the experience into the solid flesh, bone, and blood of its character. It has outlived many things during its sojourn on the astral plane and has left many undesirable qualities behind it. In moving on toward rebirth during the second soul slumber, each soul goes to where it belongs by reason of what it is. There is no favoritism shown, nor any injustice done it. The soul is not forced to reincarnate against its desires. In fact, it reincarnates because of its unsatisfied desires. It is carried into the current of rebirth because its tastes and desires have created bonds of attraction between it and the things of earth. These desires and tastes can be satisfied only through another experience of earth life, amidst environment and conditions best suited to allow it to manifest those desires and tastes. It hungers to satisfy its desires and longings, and it moves in the direction in which such satisfaction is possible. Desire is always the great motive power of the soul in determining the conditions of rebirth and the very fact of rebirth itself. A writer on the subject has well said, "The soul preserving its desire for material things, the things of flesh and material life, and not being able to divorce itself from these things, will naturally fall into the current of rebirth which will lead it toward conditions in which these desires will flourish and become manifest. It is only when the soul, by means of many earth lives, begins to see the worthlessness and illusory nature of earthly desires, and it begins to become attracted by the things of the life of its higher nature and escaping the flowing currents of earthly rebirth, it rises above them and is carried to higher spheres. The average person, after years of earthly experience, is apt to say that he or she has no more desire for earth life, and that his or her only desire is to leave the same behind forever. These persons are perfectly sincere in their statements and beliefs, but a glance into their inmost souls would reveal an entirely different state of affairs. They are not, as a rule, really tired of earth life, but are merely tired of the particular kind of earth life which they have experienced during that incarnation. They have discovered the illusory nature of a certain set of earthly experiences and feel disgusted at the same, but they are still full of another set of experiences on earth. They have failed to find happiness or satisfaction in their own experience, but they will admit, if they are honest with themselves, that if they could have had things just so and so instead of thus and so, they would have found happiness and satisfaction. The if may have been satisfied love, wealth, fame, gratified ambition, success of various kinds, etc. But be it what it may, the if is nearly always there, and that if is really the seed of their remaining desires, and the longing for that, if is really the motive for rebirth. Very few persons would care to live over their earth life in the same way, but like old Omar, they would be perfectly willing to remake the world according to their heart's desire and then live the earth life. It is really not the earth life at all which is distasteful to them, but merely the particular experiences of earth life which are disdained. Give to the average man and woman youth, health, wealth, talent, and love, and they will be very willing to begin the round of earth life afresh. It is only the absence of or failure in these or similar things which causes them to feel that life is a failure, and a thing to be joyfully left behind. The soul, in its sojourn upon the astral plane, is rested, refreshed, and reinvigorated. It has forgotten the weariness of life which it had experienced during the previous incarnation. It is again young, hopeful, vigorous, and ambitious. It feels within itself the call to action, the urge of unfulfilled desires, aspirations, and ambitions, and it readily falls into the currents which lead it to the scene of action in which these desires are manifested. The same writer also says, another point which should be cleared up is that regarding the character of the desires which serve as the motive power for rebirth, it is not meant that these desires are necessarily low or unworthy desires or longings. On the contrary, they may be of the highest character, and might be more properly styled aspirations, ambitions, or high aims. But the principle of desire is in them all. Desires high and low are the seeds of action, and the impulse toward action is always the distinguishing feature of desire. Desire always wants to have things, or to do things, or to be things. Love, even of the most unselfish kind, is a form of desire. So is aspiration of the noblest kind. A desire to benefit others is as much a desire as its opposite. In fact, many unselfish souls are drawn back into rebirth simply by the insistent aspiration to accomplish some great work for the race, or to serve others, or to fulfill some duty inspired by love. But high or low, if these desires are connected in any way with the things of earth, they are rebirth motives and rudders. But in conclusion, let us say that no soul which does not in its inmost soul desire to be reborn on earth will ever be so reborn. Such a soul is attracted toward other spheres where the attractions of earth exist not. In that case, the law of attraction carries the soul away from earth, not toward it. There are many souls which are now on the astral plane undergoing the final stages of the casting off of the earthly bonds, and there are many souls now in earth life which will never again return to earth, but which, after their next sojourn on the astral plane, will rise to the higher planes of existence, leaving the earth and all earthly things behind forever. At the present time, we are nearing the end of a cycle in which a very great number of souls are preparing for their upward flight, and many who read these lines may be well advanced in that cyclic movement. Part 11. The Soul's Progress. A very important point in the Rosicrucian teaching is that in which we are informed that the evolution of man is not confined to this planet, the Earth, but rather is extended to a chain of 7 planets. The Rosicrucians teach that the evolutionary processes of this planet are linked with and blended into the evolutionary processes of 6 other planets, and that life on this planet is likewise linked with and blended into the life on the 6 other planets of our planetary chain. The Rosicrucians teach that these 7 planets of our planetary chain are closely linked and connected by subtle etheric forces, and that there is a constant etheric current passing from one to the others and flowing ever through the entire circuit. These connected planets constitute the chain of worlds, which is the series of homes of the individual soul, and the circuit of which is traveled by all individual souls. Not only does each individual soul now on Earth reincarnate a number of times on this planet, but in the course of the ages it progresses to the next highest planet. Just as in ages past, it has progressed from the next lowest one, and this round of the chain of planets has been made several times by the human race, in some form of existence, and will be made again several times. The planets of this chain of worlds are not identical in composition and nature with the Earth. On the contrary, there is a wide difference between the several planets in this respect. The Earth is not the highest in development in this chain, but, on the contrary, it is far down on the scale, although there are others still lower. The progress of the souls around this chain of worlds, however, is not merely like a circle in which the soul travels from the lowest to the highest, but is rather according to the plan of the spiral, in which the journey always returns to the starting point, but on a higher plane of activity. This journey of the life forms from world to world has been in progress since the beginning of the present world period, and was made by the lower forms of life as they climbed the spiral stairway of evolution. A writer on the subject has said, "It is the spiral character of the progress accomplished by the life impulses that develop the various kingdoms of nature which accounts for the gaps now observed in the animated forms which people the earth. The thread of a screw, which is a uniform inclined plane in reality, looks like a succession of steps when examined only along one line parallel to its axis. The spiritual monads which are coming round the system on the animal level pass on to other worlds when they have performed their turn of animal incarnation here. By the time they come again, they are ready for human incarnation. And there is no necessity now for the upward development of animal forms into human forms. These are already waiting for their spiritual tenants. But if we go back far enough, we come to a period at which there were no human forms ready developed on the earth, when spiritual monads, traveling on the earliest or lowest human level, were thus beginning to come round. Their onward pressure in a world at that time, containing none but animal forms, provoked the improvement of the highest of these into the required form, the much-talked-of missing link. The impulse to the new evolution of higher forms is really given by rushes of spiritual monads coming round the cycle in a state fit for the inhabitation of new forms. These superior life impulses burst the chrysalis of the older form on the planet they invade, and throw off an efflorescence of something higher. The forms which have gone on, merely repeating themselves for millenniums, start afresh into growth. With relative rapidity, they rise through the intermediate into the higher forms. And then, as these in turn are multiplied with the vigor and rapidity of all new growths, they supply tenements of flesh for the spiritual entities coming round on that stage or plane of existence, and for the intermediate forms there are no longer any tenants offering. Inevitably, they become extinct. The writer above quoted from also points out a very important point in the progress of the life forms from world to world as follows. The tide of life, the wave of existence, the spiritual impulse, call it by what name we please, passes on from planet to planet by rushes or gushes, not by an even continuous flow. For the momentary purpose of illustrating the idea in hand, the process may be compared to the filling of a series of holes or tubs sunk in the ground, such as may sometimes be seen at the mouths of feeble springs, and connected with each other by little surface channels. The stream from the spring, as it flows, is gathered up entirely in the beginning by the first hole, or tub A, and it is only when this is quite full that the continued inpouring of water from the spring causes that which it already contains to overflow into tub B. This, in turn, fills and overflows along the channel which leads to tub C, and so on. It is manifest from what we have already said, and in order that the progress of organisms on globe A shall be accounted for, that the mineral kingdom will no more develop the vegetable kingdom on globe A until it receives an impulse from without, than the earth was able to develop man from the ape, till it received an impulse from without. The full development of the mineral epoch on globe prepares the way for the vegetable development, and as soon as this begins, the mineral life impulse overflows into globe B. Then, when the vegetable development on globe A is complete and the animal development begins, the vegetable life impulse overflows to globe B, and the mineral impulse passes on to globe C. Then, finally, comes the human impulse on globe A. It is necessary at this point to guard against one misconception that might arise. There is a fact to be stated which has such an influence on the course of events that, when it is realized, it will be seen that the life impulse has passed several times around the whole chain of worlds before the commencement of the human impulse on globe A. This fact is as follows. Each kingdom of evolution, vegetable, animal, and so on, is divided into several spiral layers. The spiritual monads, the individual atoms of that immense life impulse of which so much has been said, do not fully complete their mineral existence on globe A, then complete it on globe B, and so on. They pass several times around the whole circle as minerals, and then again several times around as vegetables, and several times as animals. Now, leaving behind us the consideration of the details of the progress of the lower life forms, let us consider the details of the progress of the human race. It has been seen that the great wave of human life forms flows around the planetary chain in great waves, in successive waves of progress. The successive waves are known by occultists under the name of rounds, but according to the rule, as in the great, so in the small, we find a corresponding series of spirals in the progress of the human race during each of its several sojourns on the earth. That is to say, an individual soul arriving on earth in one of the rounds does not merely live out its life here and then pass on to the next planet. On the contrary, it lives a number of lives on this planet, and among several races, there exists a spiral of races in earth life through which the individual soul must live and work its way. The number of these races is, of course, 7 for 7, is the number manifested in all of the great occult processes of the cosmos. There are 7 great rounds of human progress around the chain of worlds, and in each round there are 7 races in which the individual soul must manifest. The present round of the human race is the 4th. Each of the 7 races of the present 4th round of the race occupies the earth for a great period of time. The majority of the human race now on earth belong to the 5th race, though there are some stragglers from the 4th race still dwelling on earth. Each of these 7 great races of humanity are subdivided into 7 subraces, and each subrace is divided into 7 branches. The period during which each great root race of the human race flourishes on earth is sharply marked off from that of the one succeeding it by great convulsions of nature, which destroy practically all traces of the preceding civilization, and which leave but few survivors thereof. A writer has said of this point of the occult teaching The periods of the great root races are divided from each other by great convulsions of nature and by great geological changes. Europe was not in existence as a continent at the time the fourth race flourished. The continent on which the fourth race lived was not in existence at the time the third race flourished, and neither of the continents which were the great vortices of the civilizations of those two races is in existence now. 7 great continental cataclysms occur during the occupation of the Earth by the human life wave for one round period. Each race is cut off in this way at its appointed time. Some survivors remain in parts of the world, not the proper home of their race, but these, invariably in such cases, exhibiting a tendency to decay and relapsing into barbarism with more or less rapidity. The individuals of the first race of the present fourth round of the human race on Earth ranged from a gross type, scarcely above the brutes, up to a very barbarous type. These higher types reincarnated later as the higher individuals of the second race, the lower types of the first race constituting the lower subdivisions of the second race. The rule being that the less advanced souls of any race incarnate as the lowest types of the next and higher race. The Rosicrucian teachings have but comparatively little to say concerning the history of the peoples of the first race and the second race, but from what is taught, it may be gathered that these peoples were of a very low order of humanity. The types which we know as the cave dwellers, the Stone Age people, and the Fire people give us the nearest possible idea of what these first race and second race people must have been like. There was apparently little or nothing of what we call civilization among these people, and they were apparently about on a level with the very lowest types known among mankind on Earth today. The teachings, however, state that there were a few comparatively highly advanced souls in the latter days of the second race, who acted as the leaven for the great improvement which came with the third race. The era of the second race terminated as usual with a cataclysm which destroyed the majority of the race, and which scattered its survivors among far distant lands. Then dawned the period of the third race, the seed of its greatest activity being laid in the continent of Lemuria, which was situated on that portion of the globe which now lies at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and parts of the Indian Ocean. The continent of Lemuria also included Australia, Australasia, and other Pacific islands, these surviving portions being really the highest points of the continent of Lemuria, the lower portions of which were sunk beneath the waves ages ago. A writer says of the character of the civilization of Lemuria, life in Lemuria is described as being principally concerned with the physical senses and sensual enjoyment, only a few developed souls having broken through the fetters of materiality and reached the beginnings of the mental and spiritual planes of life. Some few, indeed, made great progress, and were saved from the general wreck in order to become the leaven which would lighten the mass of mankind during the next great cycle. These developed souls were the teachers of the new races and were looked upon by the latter as gods, and supernatural beings and legends and traditions concerning them are still existent among the ancient peoples of our present day. Many of the myths of the ancient peoples arose in this way. The traditions are that, just prior to the great cataclysm which destroyed the people of the third race, there was a body of the chosen ones which migrated from Lemuria to certain islands of the sea. These islands are now part of the mainland of India. These people formed the nucleus of the occult teachers of Lemuria, and they kept alight the flame of truth with which was lighted the torches of the fourth race, the race of the Atlanteans. With the passing away of Lemuria, the home of the third race, there arose from the depths of the Atlantic Ocean the future home of the people of the fourth race, the continent of Atlantis. Atlantis was situated in the space now occupied by a portion of the Atlantic Ocean, beginning at what is now known as the Caribbean Sea and extending over to the region now known as Africa. What we now know as Cuba and the West Indies were the highest points of the continent of Atlantis, the lower portions being now buried beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. The writer above quoted from says of the civilization of Atlantis, "The civilization of Atlantis was remarkable, and its people attained heights which seem almost incredible to even those familiar with the highest achievements of man of our own times." The chosen ones, preserved from the cataclysm, which destroyed Lemuria, and who lived to a remarkably old age, had stored up within their minds the wisdom and learning of the civilization which had been destroyed, and they thus gave the Atlanteans an enormous advantage at the start. They soon attained great advancement along all the lines of human endeavor. They perfected mechanical inventions and appliances, reaching far ahead of even our present attainments. In the field of electricity, especially, they reached the stages that our present race will reach not sooner than 200 or 300 years from now. Along the line of occult attainment, their progress was far beyond the dreams of the average man of our own race, and in fact, from this arose one of the causes of their downfall. For they prostituted the power to base and selfish uses, and practiced black magic. And so the decline of Atlantis began. But the end did not come at once or suddenly, it was gradual. The continent and the surrounding islands gradually sunk beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, the process occupying 10,000 years. The Greeks and the Romans of our own cycle had traditions regarding the sinking of the continent, but their knowledge referred only to the disappearance of the small remainder, certain islands, the continent itself having disappeared thousands of years before their time. It is recorded that the Egyptian priests had traditions that the continent itself had disappeared 9,000 years before their time. As in the case of the chosen ones of Lemuria, so was it with the elect ones of Atlantis, who were taken away from the doomed land some time prior to its destruction. These advanced individuals of the race left their Atlantean homes and, led by the Spirit, migrated to portions of what are now known as South America and Central America. Then they settled on islands of the sea. These people left the traces of their civilization in these lands, and our scientists discovering these wonders greatly at the evidences of the high culture shown in them. When the fifth race appeared, these brave and advanced souls became the teachers of the new race, and were afterwards remembered as gods and the heroes of mythology. The fifth race evolved rapidly, owing to the urge of the souls of the Atlanteans pressing forward for re-embodiment, and human forms were born to supply the demand, the fertility of the new race being marked. The writer previously referred to says of the survival of members of a disappearing race and their influence on the life of the new race. By means of the cataclysms, the races of each cycle were wiped out when their time came. But the few elect or chosen ones, that is, those who had manifested the right to become torchbearers, were carried away to some favorable environment where they became as leaven to the mass, as gods to the new races that quickly appeared. It must be noted, however, that the chosen or elect ones were not the only ones saved from the destruction that overtook the majority of the race in these cataclysms. On the contrary, a few survivors were preserved, although driven away from their former homes, and reduced to first principles of living in order to become the parents of the new race. The new races springing from the fittest of the survivors quickly formed sub-races, being composed of the better adapted souls seeking reincarnation, while the less fit sank into barbarism and showed evidences of decay. A remnant of these degraded human creatures, however, persist in incarnation for thousands of years, being composed of those souls not sufficiently advanced to take part in the life of the new races. In order to understand the advance of each race, it must be remembered that the more advanced souls, after passing out of the body, have a much longer period of rest in the higher planes, and consequently do not present themselves for reincarnation until a period quite late as compared with the hasty reincarnation of the less advanced souls who are hurried back to rebirth by reason of the strong earthly attachments and desires. In this way it happens that the earlier races of each cycle are more primitive folk than those who follow them as the years roll by. The soul of an earthbound person reincarnates in a few years, and sometimes in a few days, while the soul of an advanced man may repose and rest on the higher planes for centuries, nay, even for thousands of years, until the earth has reached a stage in which the appropriate environment may be afforded it. At the beginning of the period of the fifth race, the present race of man, there were born not only the beginning of the new sub-races which always spring into existence at the beginning of a new cycle, but there were also born the descendants of the elect saved from the destruction of Atlantis. By having been led away from the scene of danger, the new races were the descendants of the scattered survivors of the Atlantean peoples. That is, of the common run of those peoples. But the elect few were superior individuals of their race and imparted to their descendants their knowledge and wisdom. By an understanding of this distinction, we are able to comprehend the fact that at the same time there existed hordes of people of the new races more or less primitive and ignorant, and at other places certain advanced people, like the ancient Egyptians, Persians, Chaldeans, Hindus, etc. These advanced peoples represented the advanced souls, the old souls of the advanced individuals of the Lemurian and Atlantean civilizations. The descendants of some of the higher individuals were afterward known as the Assyrians and the Babylonians. In due time there appeared the beginnings of the great Roman, Grecian, and Carthaginian people. Then came the fall of the ancient peoples and the rise of new subdivisions of the race. The history of the race shows the existence and manifestation of the law of the rise and fall of nations. Regarding this phenomenon, Dr. Draper, in his History of the Intellectual Development of Europe, well says, "We are, as we often say, the creatures of circumstances." In that expression, there is a higher philosophy than might at first appear. From this more accurate point of view, we should therefore consider the course of these events, recognizing the principle that the affairs of men pass forward in a determinate way, expanding and unfolding themselves. And hence, we see that the things of which we have spoken as if they were matters of choice were in reality forced upon their apparent authors by the necessity of the times. But in truth, they should be considered as the presentation of a certain phase of life which nations in their onward course sooner or later assume. To the individual, how well we know that a sober moderation of action, an appropriate gravity of demeanor belonging to the mature period of life, change from the wanton willfulness of youth, which may be ushered in or its beginnings marked by many accidental incidents, in one perhaps by domestic bereavements, in another by the loss of fortune, in a third by ill health. We are correct enough in imputing to such trials the change of character, but we never deceive ourselves by supposing that it would have failed to take place had these incidents not occurred. There runs an irresistible destiny in the midst of these vicissitudes. There are analogies between the life of a nation and that of an individual who, though he may be in one respect the maker of his own fortunes for happiness or for misery, for good or for evil, though he remains here or goes there as his inclinations prompt, though he does this or abstains from that as he chooses, is nevertheless held fast by an inexorable fate, a fate which brought him into the world involuntarily, so far as he was concerned, which presses him forward through a definite career, the stages of which are invariable infancy, childhood, youth, maturity, old age, with all their characteristic actions and passions, and which removes him from the scene at the appointed time, in most cases against his will. So also is it with nations. The voluntary is only the outward semblance, covering but scarcely hiding the predetermined. Over the events of life we may have control, but none whatever over the law of progress. There is a geometry that applies to nations, an equation of their curve of advance, that no mortal man can touch. Thus have risen and fallen the great nations of the past, and thus will rise and fall the great nations of the future. And the law holds equally true in the case of the great nations of the present. Even at the time of this writing, great things are underway in the history of the nations of the present. Cosmic forces are at work under the thin disguise of the petty plans and ambitions of rulers and statesmen. Looking backward over any period of past history, the careful historian is able to see clearly the rise and progress of mighty movements which swept along in their current the affairs of great nations. And the historians of the future will be able to discern precisely such great movements and forces when they look back to the history of today, our present time. And in each case it will become evident that the majority of the peoples involved in the struggles have had no clear perception of the great forces at work or of the actual goal to which the great movements have tended. Thus have risen and fallen the great empires of the past, the Egyptian, the Persian, the Chaldean, the Grecian, the Roman, and the rest. Caesar, Alexander, Charlemagne, Napoleon, and the rest have been but the puppets of fate, through and by means of which she has worked out the dictates of destiny. Races and peoples now regarded as but little more than half-civilized will be the successors of the proud nations of today, just as the half-civilized Gauls, Angles, and Germanics succeeded the proud civilizations of ancient Greece and Rome. When a nation begins to decline, it is because its more advanced souls have passed on, leaving only the less progressive souls behind to carry on the work of the subrace. The advanced souls pass on to new scenes of activity, and even the backward ones are not permitted to lag very far behind, but the continual change and the creation of new environments tend to reawaken sleeping energies and to stimulate the lagging ones to fresh endeavor and activity. The following quotations from a celebrated occultist may prove of interest to the student in connection with the particular subjects considered in the present chapter. At the halfway point of the fourth round here, The polar point of the whole 7-world period has passed. From this point outwards, the spiritual ego begins its real struggle with body and mind to manifest its transcendental powers. In the 5th round, the struggle continues, but the transcendental faculties are largely developed, though the struggle between these, on the one hand, with physical intellect and propensity, is fiercer than ever. For the intellect of the 5th round, as well as its spirituality, is an advance on that of the 4th. In the 6th round, humanity attains a degree of perfection both of body and soul, of intellect and spirituality, which ordinary mortals of the present epoch will not readily realize in their imaginations. The most supreme combinations of wisdom, goodness, and transcendental enlightenment which the world has ever seen or thought of will represent the ordinary type of manhood. Those faculties which now, in the rare efflorescence of a generation, enable some extraordinarily gifted persons to explore the mysteries of nature and gather the knowledge of which some crumbs are now being offered to the ordinary world, will then be the common appanage of all. As to what the 7th round will be like, the most communicative occult teachers are solemnly silent. Mankind in the 7th round will be something altogether too godlike for mankind in the 4th round to forecast its attributes. The earth, while at present inhabited by 4th round humanity, by the wave of human life on its 4th journey round the circle of the worlds, nevertheless contains some few persons who, properly speaking, belong to the 5th round. Now, in the sense of the term at present employed, it must not be supposed that by any miraculous process any individual unit has actually traveled round the whole chain of worlds once more often than his compeers. Under the law by which the tide wave of humanity progresses, it will be seen that this is impossible. Humanity has not yet paid its 5th visit even to the planet next in advance of our own. But individual monads may outstrip their companions as regards their individual development, and so become exactly as mankind generally will be. When the 5th round has been fully evolved, a man born as an ordinary 4th round man may, by processes of occult training, convert himself into a man having all the attributes of a 5th round man, and so become what we may call an artificial 5th rounder. Part 12. The Aura and Auric Colors. One of the most interesting points of the Rosicrucian teachings to the average student is that which is concerned with the aura, or psychic atmosphere of the human individual, and the astral colors which manifest in that aura and otherwise. By aura is meant a subtle invisible emanation or exhalation creating an atmosphere around the person or thing emanating it. At least, this is the popular definition of the term. In occult writings and teachings, however, the term has a more special meaning, and is employed to indicate the psychic atmosphere surrounding each human individual, invisible to the ordinary sense of sight but perceptible by clairvoyant vision. The human aura is an emanation from the soul or souls of the person whom it surrounds. It is akin to the rays of the sun or the fragrance of the flower. It is a form of energy rather than of matter, yet it possesses a certain substantiality which justifies some writers in treating it as being composed of a very subtle form of matter. The human aura is egg-shaped and extends to an average distance of 2 or 3 feet from the body of the person emanating it. The human aura is composed of numerous elements, some of a low and some of a high order, corresponding to the elements manifesting in the soul of the person. Just as the manifestations of the souls of different persons vary greatly one from the other, so do their auras vary in the same degree. An advanced occultist with trained clairvoyant vision is able to read the mental and emotional character of a person like an open book by means of the appearance and coloring of his or her aura. The aura seen in this way presents the appearance of a luminous cloud composed of varied and shifting colors. It extends in an egg-shaped form to a distance of about 2 or 3 feet from the body and gradually growing fainter toward its outward limits until it finally disappears. Each one of the colors in the aura represents some particular thought, mental state, emotion, or feeling in the soul of the person. It will be seen at once that there is an almost infinite variation and shading of these auric colors, owing to the complexity in the emotional states of the average person. The following table of the auric colors will give you the key to the blending and shading in the luminous cloud composing the human aura. Table of the auric colors. Black indicates hatred, malice, revenge, and similar low feelings. Gray, bright shade, indicates selfishness. Ghastly shade indicates fear and terror. Dark shade indicates melancholy. Green, bright live shade indicates diplomacy, worldly wisdom, suavity, tact, politeness, and polite deceit in general. Dirty, muddy shade indicates low deceit, low cunning falsehood, trickery of a low order. Dark, dull shade indicates jealousy, envy, covetousness. Red is the color of the passions in general, but there is a great variety in its manifestations. For instance, red, dull and appearing as if mixed with smoke, indicates sensuality and the lower animal passions. Red, appearing as bright flashes, sometimes like lightning in form, indicates anger. In this case, the red usually is shown on a black background when the anger arises from hatred or malice, and on a greenish background when the anger arises from jealousy, envy, etc., and without any background when the anger arises from righteous indignation and the defense of what is believed to be a righteous cause. Red, crimson shade, represents love and varies in shade according to the character of the passion named. For instance, a dull and heavy crimson shade indicates a gross, sensual love, while the brighter, clearer, and more pleasing shades indicate love blended with higher feelings and accompanied by higher ideals. And the highest form of human love between the sexes manifests in a beautiful rose color. Brown reddish shade indicates avarice and greed. Orange bright shade represents pride and ambition. Yellow in its various shades represents intellectual power in its various forms. A beautiful, clear, golden yellow indicates high intellectual attainment, logical reasoning, unprejudiced judgment, and discrimination. A dark, dull yellow shade indicates intellectual power contenting itself with thoughts and subjects of a low, selfish order. The shade between the two just indicated denotes the presence of higher or lower thought, respectively, the dark representing the lower, and the light the higher. Blue, dark shade, represents religious emotion, feeling, and tendencies in general. The dull shades, however, indicate religious emotion of a low order, while the clearer, brighter shades indicate religious emotions of a high order. These shades vary and range from a dull indigo to a beautiful bright violet. Light blue of a peculiar hue and shade indicates spirituality. This spiritual blue is of a peculiarly clear, transparent, and luminous appearance, which is difficult to describe in words. In the auras of some persons of a very high degree of spirituality, there appear tiny luminous spark-like points, often twinkling and sparkling like the stars in the heavens on a clear night. In addition to the ordinary colors named above, there are several shades which cannot be named, for they correspond to colors outside of the field of human vision, such as infrared and ultraviolet. Without going deeply into this phase of the subject, it may be said that the ultraviolet auric colors denote high spiritual powers manifested in the direction of the highest and most worthy aims and ends, while the infrared auric colors denote psychic powers employed in unworthy ways and for base ends, as for instance that which the occultists know as black magic. There are two other auric colors which are impossible to describe in words, for there are no terms adequate for such expression. These colors are as follows. 1. The true primary yellow, which indicates the highest spiritual illumination of the intellect. And 2. True pure white or peculiar brilliancy and transparency, which indicates the presence of the awakened spirit. A writer on the subject has said of the manifestations of the auric colors, even when the mind is calm, there hover in the aura the shades indicative of the predominant tendencies in the man, so that his stage of advancement and development, as well as his tastes and other features of his personality, may be readily discerned. When the mind is swept by a strong passion, feeling, or emotion, the entire aura seems to be colored by the particular shade or shades representing it. For instance, a violent fit of anger causes the whole aura to show bright red flashes upon a black background, almost eclipsing the other colors. This state lasts for a longer or shorter time, according to the strength of the passion. If people could but have a glimpse of the human aura when so colored, they would become so horrified at the dreadful sight that they would never again permit themselves to fly into a rage. It resembles the flame and smoke of the pit which is referred to in the Orthodox churches, and in fact, the human mind in such a condition becomes a veritable hell. For the time being, a strong wave of love sweeping over the mind will cause the aura to show crimson, the shade depending upon the character of the passion. Likewise, a burst of religious feeling will bestow upon the entire aura a blue tinge. In short, a strong emotion, feeling, or passion causes the entire aura to take on its color while the feeling lasts. You will see, from what we have said, that there are two aspects to the color feature of the aura, the first depending upon the predominant thoughts habitually manifesting in the mind of the person, the second depending upon the particular feeling, emotion, or passion, if any, being manifested at that particular time. The passing color disappears when the feeling dies away, although a feeling, passion, or emotion repeatedly manifested shows itself in time upon the auric color. The habitual color shown in the aura, of course, changes gradually from time to time as the character of the person improves or changes. The habitual colors shown indicate the general character of the person. The passing colors show what feeling, emotion, or passion, if any, is dominating him at that particular time. Another writer, describing the appearance of the aura of a person, has said, "The shades and colors of the aura present an ever-changing kaleidoscopic spectacle. The trained occultist is able to read the character of any person, as well as the nature of his passing thoughts and feelings, by simply studying the shifting colors of his aura. To the developed occultist, the mind and character become an open book to be studied carefully and intelligently. Even the student of occultism, who has not been able to develop the clairvoyant vision to such a high degree, is soon able to develop the sense of psychic perception, whereby he is able to at least feel the vibrations of the aura, though he may not see the colors, and thus be able to interpret the mental states which have caused them. The principle, of course, is the same, as the colors are but the outward appearance of the vibrations themselves, just as the ordinary colors on the physical plane are merely the outward manifestations of vibrations of matter. But it must not be supposed that the human aura is always perceived in the appearance of a luminous cloud of ever-changing color. When we say that such is its characteristic appearance, we mean it in the same sense that we describe the ocean as a calm, deep body of greenish waters. We know, however, that at times the ocean presents no such appearance, but instead it is seen as rising in great mountainous waves, white-capped and threatening the tiny vessels of men with its power. Or again, we may define the word flame in the sense of a steady, bright stream of burning gas, whereas we know only too well that the word also indicates the great hot tongues of fiery force that stream out from the windows of a burning building and lick to destruction all with which it comes in contact. So it is with the human aura. At times it may be seen as a beautiful, calm, luminous atmosphere, presenting the appearance of a great opal under the rays of the sun. Again, it blazes like the flames of a great furnace, shooting forth great tongues of fire in this direction and that, rising and falling in great waves of emotional excitement or passion, or perhaps whirling like a great fiery maelstrom toward its center, or swirling in an outward movement away from its center. Again, it may be seen as projecting from its depths smaller bodies or centers of mental vibration which, like sparks from a furnace, detach themselves from the parent flame and travel far away in other directions. These are the projected thought forms of which all occultists are fond of speaking, and which make plain many strange psychic occurrences. The three primary auric colors, like their physical counterparts, the auric colors are derived from three primary colors, from which all the various combinations and colors are formed. These three primary colors, together with white and black, give us the key to the entire auric spectrum. The three primary colors are as follows: 1, red; 2, blue; and 3, yellow. From these three primary colors, all others are formed by combinations and blendings, or by the addition of black or white. Thus, the secondary colors are formed as follows: 1, green, derived from a combination of yellow and blue; 2, orange, derived from a combination of yellow and red; 3, purple, derived from a combination of red and blue. Further combinations produce other colors. For instance, green and purple form olive, orange and purple form russet, green and orange form citrine. Black is really an absence of color, while white is really a harmonious blending of all colors. The blending of the primary colors in varied proportions produces what are known as the hues of color, and adding white, we obtain tints, while mixing black produces shades. Key to the auric colors: an understanding of the basic character of the three primary auric colors and of auric black and auric white gives the student the key to the whole range of auric coloring. For this purpose, the following table is presented. The red group, red represents the physical nature, and its presence always indicates the existence and activity of that part of the nature of man. The blue group, blue represents the religious or spiritual nature, and its presence always indicates the existence and activity of that part of the nature of man. The yellow group, yellow represents the intellectual nature, and its presence always indicates the existence and activity of that part of the nature of man. White represents pure spirit, and its presence always indicates the presence and activity of that reality in the nature of man. Black represents the negation of pure spirit and opposes it in every way, and its presence always indicates the existence and activity of this negative principle in the nature of man. The various combinations of the three primary auric colors are formed in connection with white and black, as well as by the blending of the three themselves. These combinations, of course, result from the shades of mental and emotional activity manifested by the individual. But not only is the blending caused by the mixing of the colors themselves in connection with black and white, but in certain cases the body of one color is found to be streaked, striped, dotted, or clouded by other colors. At times there is perceived the mixture of two antagonistic color streams fighting against each other before blending. Again, we see the effect of one color neutralizing another. In some cases, great black clouds obscure the bright colors beneath and then darken the fierce glow of color, just as is often witnessed in the case of a physical conflagration. Again, we find great flashes of bright yellow or red flaring across the field of the aura, showing agitation or the conflict of intellect and passion. It should be noted by the student in passing that the green group of auric colors seems at first glance to be an exception to the general rule regarding the blending of the primary auric colors, and to manifest contradictions in character. For instance, it is difficult for the average student to comprehend why a blending of the spiritual blue and the intellectual yellow should yield a green indicating deceit, etc. A subtle analysis of deceit, however, gives the secret of this combination, particularly when it is noted that in certain of the less desirable of the green combinations there is combined a slight mixture of black and of red. It is not necessary to go into details concerning this particular point. It is enough to indicate the nature of the solution of the mystery. Again, there is a certain shade of green, that which manifests in the prevailing colors of trees, plants, etc., which, when shown in the auric coloring, indicates a love of nature, etc. The following words from a celebrated occultist give a valuable hint to those whose minds tend to keen analysis concerning these matters. This occultist says, "Those who are fond of analysis of this kind, I will drop the following hint, which may help them in the matter, viz. The key is found in the fact that green lies in the center of the spectrum and is a balance between the two extremes, and is also influenced by these two extremes in a startling manner." Important suggestions. The Rosicrucian teachers do not content themselves with instructing their students concerning the particular colors which, when seen in the aura, indicate the presence and activity of certain mental or emotional states in the person. They also instruct the student according to the celebrated principle of action and reaction, which forms an important feature of certain branches of the Rosicrucian teachings. That is to say, they instruct the student that if he will hold in his mind the mental image of a certain color, there will result a reaction in the direction of the production in the student's mind or emotional nature of the feeling or emotion corresponding to that particular color. For instance, if the student will hold his thought and attention firmly concentrated on the red group of colors, there will be awakened in him a strong, passional emotion and the manifestation of animal vitality and vigor, virility, courage, etc. Again, if he will hold in his mind in the same way the blue group of colors, he will experience an uplift of spiritual or religious emotional feelings, and his nature will be quickened along those lines. Again, if he would stimulate his intellectual faculties or reinvigorate a tired mind, he has but to concentrate on the yellow group of colors to obtain the desired result. So it is seen, not only do mental and emotional states manifest appropriate colors, but the colors themselves tend to produce their corresponding mental and emotional states. The action of red upon the bull and other animals is explained in this way. Also, we have here a suggestion as to why a man sees red under moments of great excitement leading to physical action of punishment, etc. It is also a part of the teachings that the three primary colors have a decided therapeutic effect, and that one may apply the principle in healing work. The colors may be applied either by means of physical colors placed in the environment of the person or else held in the mind of the mental healer giving the treatment. Here is the therapeutic scale of colors: blues, violet, lavender, etc. have a cooling and soothing effect upon the nervous system and upon the blood and bodily organs. Grass greens have a resting and invigorating effect upon the same. Yellows and oranges have an inspiring and illuminating effect upon the mental faculties. Reds have an exciting and stimulating effect upon mind and body. The protective aura. The Rosicrucian teachers also instruct their pupils in the matter of the creation and maintenance of the protective aura, which is a shelter of soul, mind, and body against evil influences directed against them consciously or unconsciously. This protective aura is an effective armor against all forms of psychic attack and invasion, no matter from whom they emanate. It affords a simple but very powerful and efficient means of protection against adverse psychic influences, malicious mental magnetism, black magic, etc., and is also a protection against psychic vampirism or the draining of magnetic strength. The method of forming the protective aura is very simple. It consists merely of the formation of a mental image, accompanied by a demand of the will, of yourself as being surrounded by an aura of pure, clear white light, the symbol and indication of spirit. A little practice will enable you to actually feel the presence and power of this protective aura. The white light is the radiation of spirit, and spirit is master of all things. As a teacher has said, the highest and deepest occult teaching is that the white light must never be used for purpose of attack or personal gain, but that it may properly be employed by anyone at any time to protect himself or herself against adverse outside psychic influences, no matter by whom exerted. It is the armor of the soul, and may well be employed in such way whenever or wherever the need arises. In the explanation given here concerning the aura will be found a key to very interesting phenomena along the lines of personal magnetism, magnetic influence, personal atmosphere, etc. Part 13, the 7 cosmic principles. The Rosicrucians teach that there are 7 cosmic principles present and operating throughout the cosmos, and extending even to its smallest activities. These 7 cosmic principles are as follows. 1. The principle of correspondence. 2. The principle of law and order. 3. The principle of vibration. 4. The principle of rhythm. 5. The principle of cycles. 6. The principle of polarity. 7. The principle of sex. The student is now asked to consider each of the above stated cosmic principles in detail. 1. The principle of correspondence. The principle of correspondence manifests in a certain correspondence or analogy or agreement between manifestations of the various planes of activity in the cosmos. It is indicated by the old Hermetic aphorism, as above, so below, as below, so above, and by the arcane axiom, ex uno dice omnes, or from one, know all. The Rosicrucians and other ancient occultists hold that the laws governing the nature and activity of the amoeba likewise govern the nature and activity of man and beings higher than man. What is true of matter is true of energy and of mind. The occultists make a practical application of this universal principle in the direction of studying the unknown by means of the known, with the knowledge that the same laws govern each. Thus, just as the solar system may be known by means of studying the atoms and molecules, so may the higher planes of being be studied by an examination of the lower planes in manifestation before us. After discovering the operation of certain principles in one thing, we may safely reason by analogy based upon the assumption that these principles exist in other things on a higher plane. Thus, we discover the nature of the unknown by means of the known. Thus, the occultist reasons that there is law and order manifest on every plane of being, that there is a principle of vibration manifest on every plane of being, that there is a principle of rhythm manifest on every plane of being, that there is a principle of cycles manifest on every plane of being, that there is a principle of polarity manifest on every plane of being, that there is a principle of sex manifest on every plane of being. And the further that human investigation is pushed into the unknown, the greater is the proof of the existence of these cosmic principles, reasoned out by the ancient occultists upon the fundamental basis of the principle of correspondence. A writer has said of this cosmic principle, there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various planes of life and being. The grasping of this truth gives one the means of solving many a dark paradox, many a hidden secret of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we are able to understand much that otherwise would be unknowable to us. This principle is of universal application and manifestation on the various planes of the material, mental, and spiritual universe. It is a universal law. The ancient Hermetists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments by which man was able to pry aside the obstructions which hid from view the unknown. Its use even tore aside the veil of Isis to the extent that a glimpse of the face of the goddess might be caught. Just as a knowledge of the principles of geometry enables a man to measure distant suns and their movements while seated in an observatory, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. Studying the monad, he understands the archangel. Without going deeply into the matter of the application of this particular cosmic principle, we may say that one of the fundamental facts of being discovered by the ancient occultists by the application of the said principle is this, that in everything there is to be found 1. Substance or body, 2. Motion or active energy, and 3. Consciousness or awareness. Therefore, when dealing with planes of being of which at the time they had but little knowledge, the ancient occultists always assumed the existence in everything on the unknown plane of these 3 great forms of manifestation. And all future esoteric investigation and discovery tended to disclose facts corroborating and sustaining the original assumption derived by analogy. And the discoveries of modern science have invariably tended in the same direction. It may be interesting to take a hasty glance at the presence of these 3 forms of manifestation as follows. Substance. The ancient occult teaching that everything has body seems to be fully corroborated by all subsequent investigation. But it must be noted that by substance or body is not necessarily meant what modern science calls matter, for the latter is merely one form or phase of substance or body. Matter, as we know it, has a great range of manifestation, within the limits of which are found the hardest granite or steel or diamond, as well as the finest and most subtle and tenuous gases. The discovery by science of what it calls radiant matter opens out a field to science previously tilled only by the occultists and metaphysicians. Such matter is really not matter at all, but supermatter and a higher form of substance or body. But known to the occultists, there are forms of substance or body as much finer and rarer than radiant matter as the latter is rarer and finer than the granite, steel, or diamond. Even the hypothetical ether of science is gross by comparison with some of the forms and phases of substance or body known to the occultists and alchemists. As a writer has said, the field of matter, as known to science, as compared with the real extent of the principle of substance, is as no more than a hairline drawn across a yardstick. The occult teachings inform us that there are living beings in existence on other planes whose bodies are composed of substance so fine and subtle that the term ethereal is the only one to be even fairly adequate to be employed in connection with them. Remember, the occult teaching is that everything has substance or body, and everything includes all that is manifest. Motion or active energy, the ancient occult teaching that everything moves, seems to be fully corroborated by all subsequent investigation. Motion, of course, results from the presence and power of active energy, and active energy is found everywhere present and in manifestation. Both the occult teaching and modern science teach that everything is undergoing constant change, and change is impossible without active energy and motion. Active energy manifests through gravitation, cohesion, chemical affinity, electronic attraction, expansion, contraction, centrifugal and centripetal force, light, heat, magnetism, electricity, etc., etc., and there are much finer forces than these known to the occultists, though not as yet discovered by science. Wherever there is substance, there is motion. Nothing is at absolute rest. Everything moves. From the tiniest electron or atom up to the greatest sun, all is in constant motion. Remember, the occult teaching is that everything moves, and everything includes all that is manifest. Consciousness, the ancient occult teaching that everything is aware, seems to be fully corroborated by all subsequent investigations. As we have seen in the study of the chapters concerning the planes of consciousness, there is manifested consciousness of some form, phase, or degree on all planes of life and being. Wherever there is substance, there is also motion and also consciousness. Substance, consciousness, and motion are always found together, never apart or divorced one from another. There can be no substance without consciousness and motion, no motion without substance and consciousness, and no consciousness without substance and motion. In the above, We have but one of the many applications of the principle of correspondence, which teaches that as above, so below, as below, so above, and that from one, know all. 2. The principle of law and order. The principle of law and order manifests in the presence and manifestation of a regular sequence, an orderly procession of phenomena in the universe of things. It is voiced by the celebrated axiom of a leading scientist that the universe is governed by laws. The spirit of this principle of truth is embodied in the very term, the cosmos, which term is derived from the Greek term kosmos, meaning the world or universe, considered in connection with perfect order and arrangement, as opposed to chaos. In the occult teachings of the Rosicrucians, it is impressed upon the student that there is no such thing as chance, insofar as chance is used in the sense of uncaused happening. The student is taught that even in the instances in which blind chance seems to rule, there is still the manifestation of law and order and causation, though the causes may lie outside of human knowledge. The term chance is now employed by careful thinkers only in the sense of the unknown or unforeseen cause, or causes of an event. In the cosmos, the same causes manifesting under the same circumstances always produce the same effects. All of our science and thought is based upon this universal fact. Intelligent reasoning would be impossible without the tacit assumption of the truth of this principle. There is no room for chance or haphazard, lawless happenings in the cosmos. Everything, every happening and every event, must have its causes and its becauses. Everything happens because of so-and-so. Given certain causes, there must ensue certain results and effects. Nothing ever happens, says the old proverb. And nothing ever does happen except for definite causes and in pursuance with universal laws. As someone has said, there is no room in the universe for anything outside of and independent of law and order. The existence of such an outside something would render all cosmic law ineffective and would plunge the universe into chaotic disorder and lawlessness. A writer has said regarding this, a careful examination will show that what we call chance is merely the idea of obscure causes, causes that we cannot understand. The word chance is derived from a word meaning to fall, the essence of the idea being that the fall of the dice are merely happenings unrelated to any cause, and this is the sense in which the term is generally employed. But when the matter is closely examined, it is seen that there is no chance whatsoever about the fall of the dice. Each time a die falls and displays a certain number, it obeys a law as infallible as that which governs the revolution of the planets around the sun and the movement of the sun itself. Back of the fall of the die are causes or chains of causes running back further than the mind can follow. The position of the die in the box, the amount of muscular energy expended in the throw, the condition of the table, etc., etc. All are causes, the effect of the combination of which may be seen in the fallen position of rest of the die. But behind these perceived causes are chains of unseen preceding causes, all of which have had a bearing upon the position of the die as it comes to rest on the table. If the die be cast a great number of times, it will be found that the numbers shown will be about equal. That is, there will be an equal number of one spot, two spots, etc. Coming uppermost. Toss a penny in the air, and it may come down either heads or tails, but make a sufficient number of tosses, and the heads and tails will even up. This is the operation of the law of average. But both the average and the single toss come under the law of cause and effect. The same writer says, there is no original happening, and every happening is merely a link in a great chain of happenings. There is a continuity between precedent happenings, the present happenings, and future happenings. There is always the relation between what has gone before and what is happening now and what will happen in the future. For instance, a stone is dislodged from the mountainside and crashes through the roof of a cottage in the valley below. At first sight, this seems to be a chance effect, but when we examine the matter, we find a great chain of causes behind it. In the first place, there was the rain which softened the earth supporting the stone and which allowed or caused it to fall. Then back of that, there was the influence of the sun, other rains, etc., which gradually disintegrated the rock from a larger piece. Then there were the causes which led to the formation of the mountain and its upheaval by convulsions of nature, and so on ad infinitum. We might follow up the causes behind the rain. Then we might consider the existence of the cottage just at that place at that particular moment. In short, we would soon find ourselves involved in a mesh of cause and effect from which we would soon strive vainly to extricate ourselves. But the Rosicrucians do not believe in fatalism in the ordinary sense of that term. Fatalism denies that preceding events have any causal relation to succeeding events and holds that the fated event would have happened in spite of any precedent event. Fatalism makes the fated event stand apart from the law of cause and effect, and implies that the event arose from the operation of some arbitrary decree or will. The following quotation from an authoritative source will serve to point out the essential distinction between fatalism and the determination of cosmic law. Fatalism is the doctrine that the course of events is so determined that what an individual wills can have no effect on that course. Fatalism must be carefully distinguished from determinism, as the confusion of these two conceptions has been responsible for much of the popular prejudice existing against determinism. Fatalism, as has been said, denies that will has efficacy in shaping events. Determinism maintains that this causally efficient will is itself to be causally accounted for. This is entirely different from the fatalistic assertion that will counts for nothing. In fact, determinism and fatalism are fundamentally antagonistic. Determinism asserts that events are determined by some of the events that immediately precede them, that if the latter were different, the former would be different. Fatalism denies that immediately preceding events have anything to do with the origination of events immediately following. It asserts that the latter would occur even if the former were changed. To say that one's death is fixed by fate is to deny that it takes place by natural law, or, more accurately, it is to say that however much one varies the cause, one cannot vary the effect. The fatalist's position is that the end is predetermined but not the means. The determinist's position is that the events now occurring lead, by causality, to other events which are thus fixed because their causes are actually existent. Or, to put it still another way, for the fatalist, what actually determines the event is not another event immediately preceding, but some mysterious decree issued by some mysterious agent ages before the event. This enables us to see that fatalism gives no scope to the will, but determinism, which merely asserts that every event has its determining conditions in its immediate antecedents, includes among those antecedents the human will. Thus, determinism is consistent with a belief in the efficacy of will, and fatalism is not. In the above, we have illustrations of some of the many applications of the principle of law and order, which teaches that nothing happens by chance, but everything happening is in accordance with law, order, and causation. 3. The principle of vibration. The principle of vibration manifests in the manifestation of a state of vibration in everything in the manifested cosmos. It is voiced by the old occult axiom, everything vibrates. Modern science has advanced to the position of the ancient occultists who asserted that everything in the cosmos was in a state or condition of continuous vibration. Science now tells us that not only is every particle of matter or every mass of matter in a state of continual vibration, but also that light, heat, magnetism, electricity, and every other form of natural force results from a state of vibration. The occultists go further than this and assert that even on the mental and spiritual planes there is ever manifest a condition of vibration. In fact, the occultists teach that the distinction between the several planes of being is almost entirely due to the difference in the rate and character of the vibrations manifested. The difference between steel and gold or diamond and clay is entirely a matter of difference in vibrations. All forms of energy are accompanied by distinctive degrees of vibrations. The conditions of material substances are created by the respective degree of vibrations manifested by each. A writer has said, "Science offers the illustration of a rapidly moving wheel, top, or cylinder to show the effects of increasing rates of vibration. The illustration supposes a wheel, top, or revolving cylinder running at a high rate of speed. We will call this revolving thing the object in following out the illustration. Let us suppose the object to be moving slowly. It may be seen readily, but no sound of its movement reaches the ear. Then the speed is gradually increased. In a few moments the movement becomes so rapid that a deep growl or low note may be heard. Then, as the rate of motion is increased, the note rises higher in the musical scale. Then, the motion being still further increased, the next highest note is distinguished. Then, one after another, all the notes of the musical scale appear, rising higher and higher as the motion is increased. Finally, when the motions have reached a certain rate, the final note perceptible to human ears is reached, and the shrill, piercing shriek dies away, and silence follows. No sound is then heard from the revolving object, for its rate of motion is so high that the human ear cannot register the vibrations. Then comes the perception of rising degrees of heat. After quite a time in which degrees of heat are being manifested without any sign of distinguishable color, though certain colors are there but imperceptible to human vision, there gradually is manifested a dull, dark, reddish color in the revolving object. As the rate of speed increases, the red becomes brighter. Then, as the speed is still further increased, the red changes into an orange color. Then follow successively the shades of green, blue, indigo, and finally violet, as the rate of vibrations increases. Then the violet fades away, and all color disappears, the human eye not being able to register them. But there are invisible rays emanating from the revolving object, the rays that are used in photographing and other subtle rays of light. Then begin to be manifested the peculiar rays known as the X-rays, etc. As the constitution of the object changes, electricity and magnetism are emitted when the appropriate rate of vibration is attained. When the revolving object reaches a certain degree or rate of vibration, its molecules disintegrate and resolve themselves into the original elements or atoms. Then the atoms in turn disintegrate and are resolved into the countless corpuscles which constitute the atom. And finally, even the corpuscles disintegrate, and a condition of ethereal substances is produced. Science does not dare to follow the illustration further, but the occultists teach that if the vibrations were continuously increased, the revolving object would mount up the successive states of manifestation and would display the various higher stages of consciousness. The occultists teach that each and every mental or emotional state has its own distinctive rate of vibration, and that the secret of emotional contagion is due to the fact that similar vibrations are set up in the emotional nature of persons subjected to the influence of strong emotion in another person. All manifestations of thought, emotion, will, desire, or feeling, or any other mental state, are accompanied and caused by vibrations of a certain high rate, and that these vibrations tend to influence others in their field of induction and tend to set up in the others similar vibrations. In this fact lies the secret of mental influence, personal magnetism, etc. A knowledge and mastery of the science of mental vibrations enables the skilled Rosicrucian to change the rate of his mental vibrations at will, and to thus maintain a state of mental calm and power, unaffected by the thought vibrations of those around him. So truly does advanced modern scientific thought recognize the nature of vibrations that the axiom is announced that the difference in things consists entirely of difference in vibrations. This axiom is akin to the ancient occult aphorism that things manifest differences according to their rate of vibrations. So it is seen, all human investigation tends to prove the truth of the old occult axiom that everything vibrates. 4. The principle of rhythm. The principle of rhythm manifests that universal regular swing, or time beat, which is apparent in all the manifested world, from its highest to its lowest manifestation. The spirit of this principle was expressed in the ancient occult axiom, everything beats time. Rhythm means regularly recurring motion, change, or impulse proceeding in time-measured alternating sequence. The term alternating means succeeding, acting, or happening in turn. The term recurring means returning repeatedly, occurring at stated intervals or according to some regular rule. Rhythm manifests in regular recurrence, succession, and turn, repeated occurrence at stated intervals, etc. The simplest and most typical example or illustration of rhythm is found in the swinging of the pendulum, the revolution of the earth on its axis and around the sun in regular measured time, the beating time of the metronome or the baton of the musical director, or the measured time in poetry or music. Rhythm means beating time in regular motion. In all rhythm there is recurring motion, change, and activity, action or motion in opposite directions, alternations between the opposite poles of action or motion, and a regular interval of time between the alternating actions or motions. Rhythmic change or motion proceeds by alternating swings between these two extremes, with a regular period of time elapsing between each beat, swing, or impulse in either direction. The period of time between the two alternating impulses constitutes the rhythmic rate, degree, or beat, its rhythmic measure of periodicity. The term periodicity so often employed in connection with the subject of rhythm, means state of occurring or recurring at fixed intervals of time. Every phenomenal thing manifests periodicity by reason of the presence and activity of the principle of rhythm. Every phenomenal thing has its own rhythmic beat or measure of periodicity. All scientific investigation tends to corroborate the ancient occult axiom, everything beats time. A leading scientist has said, rhythm is a necessary characteristic of all motion. Given the coexistence everywhere of antagonistic forces, a postulate which is necessitated by our experience, and rhythm is a necessary corollary. All motion alternates, be it the motion of planets in their orbits or ethereal corpuscles in their undulations, be it the cadence of speech or the rise and fall of prices. It became manifest that this perpetual reversal of motion between limits is inevitable. The atoms in their vibrations manifest rhythm. The swing of the planets and the whirling of the earth manifest rhythm. The rise and fall of the tides manifest rhythm. The swing of the pendulum is interrupted rhythm. Completed rhythm is represented only by a completed revolution or circular movement. Uninterrupted rhythm always manifests as a complete movement in an orbit, but inasmuch as the center between the two extremes is itself moving in response to a higher order of rhythm, we see at last that all completed rhythm manifests as a spiral, a circular movement which at the same time is moving forward. By the principle of rhythm, day is followed by night and night by day. Summer and winter alternate in their appearance, sleeping and waking alternate, work and rest exchange places. Involution is followed by evolution, and evolution by involution. All changes proceed according to rhythmic order and sequence. The conduct of mankind is regulated by rhythm. Fashions in dress, in taste, and in feeling all come and go and come again. Everything comes back in time. Races rise and fall and then rise again, again to fall. The course of empire wends its way in cyclic procession around the circle. History repeats itself. Even our emotions have their tidal movements. A writer has said of an important fact concerning rhythm in our emotional states, nothing swings beyond the limit of its extremes. Nothing can pass beyond its rhythmic limits. Consequently, if a thing swings far in one direction, it swings back equally far in the other. Its reaction is in the measure of its action, though in an opposite direction. If its swing is great, its extremes are widely apart. If the swing is small, then the extremes are close together. The pendulum illustration may be applied to the phenomena on all planes. A short beat of the metronome allows the rod to move only a short distance each way. The long beat admits of a wide swing. And in the same way, those who suffer keenly also enjoy keenly, while those whose natures admit of but little suffering are also incapable of more than a limited capacity for enjoyment. A pig suffers little and enjoys but little, while a highly organized, sensitive individual suffers the torments of emotional and mental hell at times, while at others he mounts to the heavenly emotional and mental realms. The pendulum swings as far in one direction as in the other. In some of the higher teachings of the Rosicrucians, the student is instructed in the application of the principle of rhythm to the mastery of his emotional states and feelings. The essence of this secret teaching is that the wise, perceiving the inevitable reaction following action, the ebb tide following the high tide, manage to escape the consequences of the reaction by rising to their higher realms or planes of consciousness just before the time of the backward swing of the emotional pendulum, thus allowing the reactionary movement to be manifested only on their lower planes of consciousness, while the ego dwells serenely on the upper plane. A writer, speaking along the lines just mentioned, has said, "The masters taught that by an understanding of the principle of rhythm, man could escape many bewildering and perplexing changes in his emotional states and feelings. They called this the process of neutralization, the operations of which consisted of raising the ego above the vibrations of the ordinary conscious plane and onto the higher. This was akin to rising above a thing and allowing the thing to pass beneath one. The occult masters and their advanced students polarize themselves at the positive pole of a particular emotional state and, by a process of refusing or denial, they manage to escape the effects of the swing of the emotional pendulum to the negative pole of that emotion. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery really proceed in this same manner, though usually unconsciously and without a true understanding of the law they are operating. By refusing to allow their negative mental and emotional states to manifest in them, They really neutralize them and cause them to pass under them on a lower plane of consciousness. The advanced occultist, however, proceeds consciously and deliberately to this end, and acquires a degree of balance, poise, and power almost incredible. The further the student penetrates in his investigations along the lines of the physical, the mental, or the spiritual, the more will he become convinced of the truth of the ancient occult axiom that everything beats time. 5. The principle of cycles. The principle of cycles manifests that universal circular direction of process or progress which is apparent in all the manifested world, from its highest to its lowest manifestation. The spirit of this principle was expressed in the ancient occult axiom. Everything proceeds in circles. It is apparent to all careful thinkers and investigators that all progress or procession of things or events follows the path of the circle. All things, physical, mental, and spiritual, manifest this cyclic or circular trend. World and atoms, the cosmos, and man, all are under this law. This principle is understood more clearly when we understand that a completed and uninterrupted manifestation of rhythm results in the completion of a circular movement. Therefore, the circular or cyclic trend of things is really closely allied to the principle of rhythm, and both rhythm and cyclicity are closely allied to the principle of vibration. The following interesting quotation from a writer on the subject serves to bring out some of the main points concerned in the consideration of the activities of this particular principle. Cyclicity is akin to rhythm and arises by reason of it. All events tend to move in cyclic trend, in constant circular movement. The law of cyclicity manifests in the universal tendency of things to swing in circles. Cyclicity is the outgrowth or more complex form of rhythm. The primal manifestation of rhythm is action to and fro in a straight line or path, a movement backward and forward between two extremes or poles of action. This would be the invariable movement if the particular force manifested were the only manifestation of force or energy in that particular field of the cosmos. But when the swinging pendulum, free to move in any direction, is subjected to the conflicting attractions and repulsions of other manifestations of force and energy, then there is manifested the universal tendency toward the circular trend, the tendency to convert the straight path of the swing into a circular path or cycle. The action and reaction, the attraction and repulsion arising from the conflict between the force of the rhythmic swing in a straight line on the one hand and the attractive and repellent forces from without on the other hand, tend to swing the moving thing in a perfect circle around a central point, axis, or pivotal center. And these conflicting forces are in operation throughout the cosmos, and the manifestation of cyclicity may be noticed on all planes. There is ever the evidence of the cyclic trend of things and events, the tendency to move in circles. The electrons in the atoms move in circles, just as do the planets around the sun, and just as does the sun move around some other center in space. The highest occult teachings, as well as the highest speculations of science, inform us that there is always a movement in circles around some given point, and the movement of the said point, or center of motion around some other center, and so on to infinity. The same writer continues, all events tend to move in cyclic trend, in constant circular movement of continuous recurrence. The experience of man, aided by the reports of history, bears out this statement. The student of human history is struck by the continuous cyclic trend manifested throughout the ages of history. The student of philosophy is attracted by the same evidence in his own field. And so it is with every field of human thought. The cyclic trend is noticeable everywhere. Races and nations rise, flourish, decline, and fall, only to be succeeded by others traveling over the same lines. Westward the star of empire takes its flight. The center of political power is constantly changing. The civilizations of Lemuria, Atlantis, Egypt, Chaldea, Rome, and Greece arose and passed away. Our own civilization is but traveling over the same general lines. All forms of political government, monarchic, autocratic, democratic, in all their variations, were known in the past as in the present. The same law is observable in the history of philosophical thought. Philosophical theories popular in Greece over 2,000 years ago fell into disrepute, but are now again forcing their way to the front. The scientific theories of causation, continuity, determinism, and evolution were popular in ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago, and they were likewise popular in ancient Egypt and India centuries before that time. Fashions in literature, dress, and manner constantly recur, traveling round and round their little circles. Laugh as we may at the absurdity of fashion and dress, nevertheless it is proceeding according to cyclic law. Religious ideas are as old as the world: pantheism, polytheism, monotheism, and atheism. All have played their parts of fashion in religious thought over and over again, and will play them again. The present-day revival of interest in the occult teachings arises from the operations of the same law, and the life of individuals manifests the same trend and tendency. A little thought will convince you that the majority of people travel in circles throughout their entire life, the same old thing over and over again, recurring at intervals of greater or lesser duration according to the nature and character of the person. Many people are like the squirrel who travels all day on his whirling wheel, always going but getting nowhere, ever ending just where he began. The thoughtful student, considering what has just been called to his attention, will naturally ask us how it is, if this be so, that there is any real progress at all. If, says he, there is nothing but a continuous running around in circles, a constant traveling around without getting anywhere, how is it that there is evident a real progress, a real evolution, a real advancement in the scale of life and being? The answer is simple. Given a circular movement around a given point, axis, or center of attraction, and further given an advancing movement of that center point or axis, it follows that the first circular movement will also be a spiral movement. If the central point is advanced, then the circular movement is converted into a spiral movement, and while there persists a going round and round as before, each going round process travels on a little higher plane or a more advanced position. And this is just what exists in the cosmos, a cosmic spiral process, onward and upward in advancing and rising circles. An old aphorism of an ancient school of occultism is, "The only escape from cyclicity is by means of transmutation into spirality." In other words, by advancing the central point of motion, the conversion of the circle into the spiral is one of the highest forms of alchemy, and in this aphorism is found one of the secrets of Rosicrucianism. The rule operates on each and every plane of being, physical, mental, and spiritual. A writer has said of this, "The ego may convert the circle of its life's motion into an advancing and rising spiral, which, while carrying him around the life circle, will at the same time raise him a stage higher at each turn." The mountain of attainment around which winds the spiral path is traveled only in this way. Around and around the pilgrims travel, seemingly retracing their steps, but in reality constantly mounting upward. By advancing the central point by means of the will, the wise and the strong convert the circles into spirals, and thus advance and attain. This, indeed, as the old aphorism states, is one of the highest forms of mental alchemy. The further the student penetrates in his investigations along the lines of the physical, the mental, or the spiritual, the more will he become convinced of the truth of the ancient occult axiom that everything proceeds in circles. 6. The principle of polarity. The principle of polarity manifests that universal fact of the pairs of opposites, or the antinomies, which is apparent in all the manifested world, from its highest to its lowest manifestation. The spirit of this principle was expressed in the ancient occult axiom: everything has its opposite, which is the other pole of its manifestation. The principle of polarity may be stated as follows: all phenomena manifest polarity, or opposite and contrasted sets of qualities, properties, or powers operating in opposite and contrasted directions. The ancient philosophers made this one of the chief features of their teachings under the name of the opposites, the pairs of opposites, or the antinomies, according to the usage of the respective schools. They held that every phenomenal thing possesses and manifests these pairs of opposite qualities, properties, and powers. They also held that each and every set of polarized opposites constitutes a unity consisting of a reconciliation and balancing of the opposing poles. They also held that every phenomenal thing itself is one of a pair of polarized opposites which together constitute a greater unity, and so on either to infinity or until the opposites find final reconciliation and harmony in an infinite reality. The simplest, and yet the most characteristic of the many examples and illustrations of polarity is seen in the presence and activity of the two opposite and contrasting poles of the magnet, the positive and negative poles. The magnet is one, a unity consisting of a balance and a reconciliation of the two opposing poles and their respective activities and powers. The illustration is typical and fully illustrates the general principle. We may see evidences of polarity in any direction toward which we may turn in our search. There is always an up and a down, a top and a bottom, a high and a low, a right and a left, a forward and a backward. There is always a past and a future, a now and a then, a before and an after, a day and a night, time and an eternity. There is always a fast and a slow, a motion and a rest, a hot and a cold, a good and a bad, a light and a dark, a conscious and an unconscious, an active and an inactive, an involution and an evolution, an analysis and a synthesis, a thesis and an antithesis, a male and a female, a positive and a negative, a youth and an age, a health and a disease, a building up and a tearing down, a birth and a death, a coming and a going, a life and a death, a material and an immaterial, a heavy and a light, an abstract and a concrete, a long and a short, a broad and a narrow, a large and a small, a north and a south, an east and a west, a love and a hate, a courage and a fear, a faith and a doubt, a belief and a disbelief, a truth and an error, and so on ad infinitum. Whenever we see a phenomenal quality, property or characteristic, a state or a condition, we are fully justified in assuming the existence of an opposite to it, which opposite thing will be found to act in the opposite and contrasted direction to it. This is an infallible and invariable rule of phenomenal existence. In case the opposite of a thing is not known to us, because it has not as yet been discovered by or made known to us. Nevertheless, in such case, we are fully justified in ascribing to the unknown opposite the qualities and characteristics diametrically opposed to the known opposite. The rule is this: whatever is affirmed of one of a pair of opposites must be denied to the other, and whatever is denied to the one must be affirmed of the other. So true and infallible is this rule that it may be applied and employed as the basis of logical reasoning from the known to the unknown, for the purpose of discovering the latter. One of the most surprising features of this discovery is that we finally perceive that the two contrasting sets of qualities are really but two aspects or phases of the whole thing, the real thing, or thing in itself, the unity of the two instead of being two separated and distinct things. Or, stating it in other words, we discover that the two opposing sets of characteristics are merely relative to each other, and together form a correlated unity and balanced whole. As an illustration of the fact just stated, we may consider the two opposites known as hot and cold, respectively. Surely there can be no two qualities apparently more distinct and separate from each other, more diametrically different from each other. But careful examination shows us that the two contrasting things are really but degrees, conditions, and states of the same thing. There is no such thing as an absolute hot or an absolute cold. There are merely different degrees of this hot-cold pair of opposites which, for convenience, we call heat. We cannot point out a place on the thermometer where hot ceases and cold begins, or vice versa. The two states or conditions blend into each other, and any statement regarding them is found to be merely comparative. If we place one hand in a bowl of very hot water, and the other in a bowl of ice-cold water, and then suddenly withdraw both hands and plunge them into a bowl of lukewarm water, what happens? Simply this, that we find that the hot water hand feels a sensation of coolness, while the cold water hand feels a sensation of heat, each experience resulting from the comparison with the previous experience. We may consider the emotional states of love and hate as another illustration of the same principle. Surely these two emotions seem irreconcilable and impossible to harmonize. But let us see. At the one end of the emotional scale of love-hate, we find intense love. Then descending on the scale, we find varying and gradually lessening degrees of love. Then we find the balanced point of indifference, which seems to be neither love nor hate, but which in reality is the subtle balancing of the two emotions. Then, descending the scale, we find a faint degree of aversion or dislike, then a series of gradually increasing degrees of dislike, until finally real hate is met with, and so on until we reach the degree of intense and extreme hate. Yet all are seen to be but degrees on the same emotional scale of love-hate. Sometimes there is a rapid change and shift on the scale of the opposites. Love is quickly transmuted to hate. The best friends and most ardent lovers become the bitterest enemies, and on the other hand, persons who originally detest each other frequently become ardent lovers after a time. And old enemies, when reconciled, frequently become the closest friends. The swing is often as far in one direction as was its former swing in the opposite direction. Up changes to down as the earth revolves, and hot becomes cold when the vibrations are changed. This also applies to hard and soft, tenuous and solid, etc. The conditions depending entirely upon the rate of vibrations and relative positions of the particles of the matter of which the things are composed. Moreover, constant emphasis or activity of one opposite frequently leads to a manifestation of the other opposite. We often fly to the other extreme of feeling and action when we have overemphasized the former emotional states. We get tired and disgusted with one set or condition of things and feel a desire to fly to the opposite condition or set. Too much of a good thing often causes us to dislike it. Likewise, if we travel far enough west, we finally reach the extreme east, and vice versa. If we travel far enough north, we pass the pole and find ourselves proceeding south. At the North Pole, no matter in what direction we may travel, we always find ourselves traveling south. While at the South Pole, we can travel north only, no matter which way we may step out. The discovery that opposites are identical in the sense of being but the two contrasting poles of the same thing opens up a wonderful field of mastery to the occultist, who has acquainted himself with the law of polarization in its phases of transmutation and balance. The understanding of the principle of polarity enables the occultist to transmute one mental state into another along the lines of polarization. Things belonging to different classes cannot be transmuted into each other, but the opposing poles of the same thing may be so changed, that is, may have a change in their polarity affected and thus be transmuted one into the other. Thus, love can never become east or west, or red or violet, but love may be changed into hate, or hate into love, by a shifting of polarity. Courage may be transmuted into fear, or fear into courage. Hard may be changed into soft, dull into sharp, hot into cold, and so on, the transmutation always being between things of the same kind. The fearful man may shift his polarity and, by thus changing his emotional vibrations, may become filled with courage. Likewise, the slothful man may shift his polarity into activity and energetic action. The key lies in the fact that in this process of transmutation, there is not an actual change of one thing into another distinct thing, but rather a shifting of the center of polar force from one extreme of the scale to the other, just as one would shift the carriage of his typewriter from 1 to 70, or change the focus of an opera glass. A writer on the subject has said of this particular point, in addition to the changing of one's own mental states by the operation of the art of polarization, the principle may be extended so as to embrace the phenomena of the influence of one mind over that of another, of which so much has been written and taught of late years. When it is understood that mental induction is possible, that is, that mental states may be produced by induction from those of other persons, then we can see how readily a certain rate of mental vibrations, or polarization of a certain mental state, may be communicated from one person to another, and the polarity of the second person be changed accordingly. It is along these lines that many excellent results of mental treatment are obtained, though the practitioner may not understand the nature of the principle he is using. For instance, a person is blue, melancholy, depressed in spirits, and full of fear. A mental scientist bringing his own mind up to the desired vibration by means of his own will, which thus produces the desired polarization in his own case, then, by induction, communicates these polarized vibrations to the mind of the patient, the result being that the patient's emotional states are converted from the negative polarization to the positive. A knowledge of the existence of this great occult principle will enable the occultist to better understand his own mental states and those of other people. He will see that these states are all matters of degree, and seeing thus, he will be able to raise or lower his mental and emotional vibrations at will, to change his mental poles, and thus be a master of his emotions instead of being a slave to them. And by his knowledge, he will be able to aid his fellow men intelligently and by appropriate methods change their mental and emotional polarization when the same is desirable. In concluding our consideration of the principle of polarity, we ask the student to study carefully the following words written by one who has a knowledge of the great subject of balance, the art of which consists in finding the center between the two extremes, and thus maintaining a poise and balance, which is undisturbed by any mental or emotional storm. This writer says, "Poise is power. Poise results from balance. Balance is secured by adjusting and maintaining the center between the poles of the pairs of opposites. By balanced poise, the master neutralizes polarity and rhythm by resolving them into unity. In the heart of the storm is peace. In the center of life, there is poise and power. Seek it ever, O neophyte, for in it thou shalt find thyself. The foregoing sentences compose the substance of an ancient arcane aphorism, in which is contained the seed thought generated in the centuries of thought and experience of the arcane teachers. Do not pass it by because of its simplicity. Poised balance is the aim and goal of the arcane initiates. It is the secret of mastery. There is always a center of everything, but the center exists only because of the existence of the circumference. There is always a point of poise between the poles of every pair of opposites, but that point exists only because the extremes exist. And in the central point is always found the power of the whole event or thing. In the center of gravity of the earth, one would be able to remain in a position of perfect poise, unsupported except by the concentrated gravity of the whole earth, so nicely poised that a mere effort of the will would exert sufficient energy to propel him in any desired direction. The powers of the opposites are concentrated at the central point. There all power is to be found, and there only. The axiom action and reaction are equal indicates a central point in which lies the true lever which will move the whole. At the center one is able to use action and reaction without being subject to either. The initiate strives to attain the state of equilibrium and absolute poise. He yearns to master the art of traversing the razor edge of life, balancing himself perfectly, like the trained mental athlete that he is, by means of the balancing pole of the opposites which he has firmly grasped, pitting the opposites one against the other, balancing law by law. The master traverses the slender tightrope thread which separates the world of desire from the world of will. O neophyte, in the center of life shalt thou indeed find poise and power. In the heart of the storm shalt thou find peace. In the center of the cosmos shalt thou find thyself. He who finds the center of himself finds the center of the cosmos, for at the last they are one. The student, when confronted with questions and problems in which a choice is difficult by reason of the strong activity of both extremes of polarization, of both of the pair of opposites, is advised to seek out the center between the two opposing poles and to stand firmly there, feeling assured that there and there only is the place of peace, poise, and power. In the one word balance there is to be found the secret of many or most of the perplexing questions of life. Seek ever poise and balance, and you will have power and peace. The further the student penetrates in his investigations along the lines of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, the more will he become convinced of the truth of the ancient occult axiom that everything has its opposite, which is the other pole of its manifestation. 7. The principle of sex. The principle of sex manifests in the universal presence of sex distinction and activity which is apparent in all the manifested world, from its highest to its lowest manifestations. The spirit of this principle was expressed in the ancient occult axiom: sex is omnipresent and all-pervasive in the universe. All creation is generation, and all generation proceeds from sex. All deep students of occultism and many students of modern science perceive the truth of the Rosicrucian ancient doctrine that sex is all-pervasive, all-present, and is the cause of all creation. For creation always results from generation, and generation proceeds from sex activity. There is sex manifested in everything. The masculine and feminine principles are ever at work in the universe, this not only on the physical plane of being, but also on the mental and spiritual planes of being. On the physical plane, sex manifests physical generation. On the mental plane, it manifests mental generation. And on the spiritual plane, it manifests spiritual generation. An understanding of the cosmic principle of sex will give one a clear insight into many subjects which have proved perplexing to the majority of thinkers. In a preceding chapter of this book, we have called your attention to the fact that the activities of the electrons, the atoms, and the corpuscles of which matter is composed are purely sexual activities, that all attraction is sex attraction, and that as all cosmic activity results from attraction, therefore sex is the motive power behind the activities of the cosmos. A careful examination of the discoveries of modern science, which are being announced from year to year, will convince the student that all are explainable under the Rosicrucian theory of the principle of sex, and are explainable under no other hypothesis. Passing on to the plane of mind, we find that many of the discoveries of modern psychology tend to verify the Rosicrucian theory also. Modern psychologists are devoting much time and space to their presentations of the various theories and discussions of that other mind, which they variously call the subjective mind, the subconscious mind, the subliminal mind, etc. In all of their theories, however, one point stands out prominently: the point that this other mind is subject to stimulating influences from the conscious or objective mind, and after being so subjected to the influence or stimulus of the latter, the other mind becomes fertile and produces a wealth of ideas, thoughts, and actions. But so far, none of the psychologists have even attempted to explain the nature of the influence or stimulus of the one mind upon the other. And here is where the Rosicrucian teachings are much needed. The Rosicrucian recognizes and realizes at once the fact that the other mind is feminine and the stimulating mind is masculine, and that the process is clearly one of fertilization followed by mental conception and generation. So clear is the analogy that one has but to have his attention directed toward it, to realize its truth and its proper application to the case before us. It is so clear that one, on learning it, cannot see why the promulgators of the dual mind theories and their commentators can have failed to perceive the secret underlying the phenomena discovered by them and embodied in their various theories. Thomson J. Hudson, in his book The Law of Psychic Phenomena, in which in 1893 he announced his celebrated theory of the dual mind, came near to perceiving the secret hidden in the teaching of the ancient occultists, but his prejudices caused him to pass it by. In his statement at the beginning of his second chapter of said book, he says, "The mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophers discloses the same general idea, the general idea of the duality of mind." But he failed to follow up the promising lead and thus lost the opportunity to complete his discovery, or rediscovery, of the duality of the mind's activities, which has been known to occultists for ages. The other mind of the human individual may be regarded as a mental womb. In fact, the ancients so styled it, in which has generated a wealth of mental offspring. It is a mine of latent possibilities of generation, the generation of mental progeny of all sorts and kinds. Its powers of mental generative energy are enormous, but it does not generate except under the stimulus of the conscious mind of its owner or some other individual. The phenomena of suggestion and hypnotism are explainable under the Rosicrucian theory of mental sex. A writer on this subject has said, "Suggestion and hypnotism operate in the same way, viz., by the masculine principle projecting its vibrations toward the feminine principle in the mind of the other person. The latter taking the seed thought and allowing it to develop into maturity when it is born on the plane of consciousness. The masculine principle in the mind of the person giving the suggestion directs a vibratory current toward the feminine principle in the mind of the person who is the object of the suggestions, and the latter accepts it according to natural laws unless the will interposes an objection. The seed thought thus lodged in the mind of the other person grows and develops, and in time is regarded as the rightful mental offspring of the person, whereas it is really like the cuckoo's egg placed in the nest of the sparrow, and like the offspring of the cuckoo, it destroys the rightful offspring of the owner of the nest. The proper method is for the masculine and feminine principles in the mind of a person to coordinate and to act harmoniously in conjunction with each other. But unfortunately, the masculine principle in the mind of the average person is too lazy to act, the activities of the will too slight. The consequence being that such persons are ruled almost entirely by the minds and wills of other persons whom they allow to do their thinking and willing for them. The majority of persons are but mere shadows and echoes of other persons having stronger wills and minds than themselves. The strong men and women of the world invariably manifest the masculine principle of will, and their strength depends materially upon this fact. Instead of living by the impressions made upon their minds by others, they dominate their own minds by means of their own will, obtaining the kind of thoughts desired, and moreover they dominate the minds of others likewise in the same manner. Look at the strong people. See how they manage to implant their seed thoughts in the minds of the masses of the people, thus causing the latter to think thoughts in accordance with the desires and wills of the strong individuals. This is why the masses of people are such sheep-like creatures, never originating an idea of their own, nor using their own powers of mental activity. The manifestation of mental sex may be noticed all around us in our daily life. The magnetic persons are those who are able to use the masculine mental principle in the direction of impressing their ideas upon others. The actor who makes people weep or cry as he wills is employing this principle more or less unconsciously. So is the successful orator, statesman, preacher, writer, or other person who is before the public. The peculiar influence exerted by some persons over others is explainable in this way. The operation of mental sex activity in the form of vibratory mental currents. Here we may find the secret of personal magnetism, personal influence, fascination, etc. The principle of sex manifests and operates also on the spiritual plane of being according to its characteristic principles, and its results are spiritual generation and regeneration. We regret that we are not permitted to go deeply into this phase of the subject in this book. But a detailed consideration of the operation of sex on this high plane would be contrary to the interests of the best in occultism, and would invite a misuse of power on the part of unprincipled persons who fail to understand the evil consequences to themselves coming as a reaction following actions of this kind. The true student, however, by using his power of reasoning by analogy, doubtless will be able to work out some of the problems concerned with the phase of the question thus mentioned. Such will find the secret in the old axiom, as above, so below, as below, so above. The further the student penetrates in his investigations along the lines of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, the more will he become convinced of the truth of the ancient occult axiom that sex is omnipresent and all-pervasive in the universe. All creation is generation, and all generation proceeds from sex. I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. Thanks for watching.